you have that conversation to guide. I lost my train of thought. If you're just joining us, we had a 10-minute conversation that I forgot to record. So that's the penalty for not joining us live. I am so sorry. It was a great 10 minutes. Don't you think, everybody? Everyone nod your head. Awesome 10 minutes. But we're talking about how down payments work when one or the other party breaches the contract. And so money that goes into so you have a conversation and you attempt to resolve things amicably. That's step number one. Step number two, if Donna comes back and says, great, we'll do that. Here's the signed document. Lovely. Then we just go on our merry way. However, if step number two is that Donna comes back and says, yeah, the sellers are not excited about this, and they're going to be speaking to their attorney about what their options are. I can't guarantee you that that deposit money is going to be freely released. Got it. Understood. You know what? I will have the buyer speak to their attorney as well. And you know, if you have an update, please let me know. Let's see how we can make this make sense for everybody. Right? And maybe then the attorneys start to get involved. If in fact the sellers are advised by their attorney that, hey, you know what? They breached the contract. There's $20,000 sitting in an escrow account someplace. Here's the part that we get wrong. That money is not automatically delivered to the seller. There is nothing automatic about deposit money. So the answer in a scenario like that is, if you choose to to breach the contract and step out, you may put your deposit money at risk. That's the language we have to use. You may put your deposit money at risk unless we can get the sellers to agree. Or if we can't get the sellers to agree, here's what happens. Here's step number 4, right? Because money in escrow, and you should write this down because it's an important piece of knowledge. Money in escrow only comes out of escrow one of 2 ways. And that is agreement of the parties. Either the parties agree to terminate the contract, and here's how the money gets divided, or a closing happens, right? A closing is ultimately an agreement of the parties because you're just fulfilling the contract. And the other, so that's number 1. Number 2, in order of the court. Without one of those 2 things happening, the money just sits in escrow. There's nothing automatic. The buyers don't get it back, the sellers don't get it. And it sits in escrow until somebody decides to file some kind of a suit to get it out of escrow, right? So a seller would have to then actually file some kind of a suit to have a court hear the case and have a judgment in their favor. That's an order of the court to have that released to the seller. So sellers who think that if a buyer breaches, just automatically get the money, and if you've delivered that information, right? Do you see how sellers are then less than pleased when they find out, okay, they don't just write me a check. We have to go through a whole lawsuit process. And guess what? Lawsuits are not free. They cost money. So now all of a sudden that $20,000 that's sitting in escrow doesn't look like so much money when you have to spend most of it on attorneys' costs and court fees. You see how that works? Be honest, for how many of you is that a surprise to? Is that information kind of new news, right? Because it's easy to think that somebody breaches the contract, the other party just gets the money. There's no such thing as automatic when it comes to money in escrow, no such thing. So I want you to be really cautious and clear with your own clients around how you're describing that. With buyer clients, they could lose their deposit. They could put their money at risk. With seller clients, you may have an opportunity to retain the deposit as damages. However, that doesn't happen automatically, right? You need to speak to your attorney about the process to actually make that happen. It's complicated and does cost money. Here's the reason it's so important that we as an industry understand how that works. Because it takes they're right, I'm wrong, I'm crossing my arms and holding my breath because I know I'm right version of this kind of scenario off the table a lot of times. Because nobody wants to go and have a big legal fight. If more people understood what I just said, it would encourage more people to speak to each other and attempt to work things out. Maybe in that scenario, Donna comes back to me and says, look, the only thing that they'll do, because they were off the market, but for 2 weeks, and they lost a better offer, they went with yours because of X, Y, and Z, but they lost a higher offer. If they'll agree to split the deposit, they'll sign the agreement. Or if they'll agree to $5,000 as damages and we'll return the other 15, right? It becomes another conversation, though. That's how that can be resolved without everything just sitting in escrow. All right, so that's the real story about how this kind of thing works. So be clear about that so you're saying the right things to your clients. Nothing is automatic. Donna.
And that's just a little advertisement why you should continue to come to class. Because believe me, there are so many people who don't know things that we should know as licensed people. And it's not just because you're brandy new. But I wanted to respond to what James was saying about how all of a sudden this is information that, they thought it was totally different. I guarantee you, just like the conversation we just had about how money comes out of escrow, by the time you get to the inspections, that will not be the first thing that you've said to your clients that is new information for them. I don't care if they've bought 5 houses. They don't do what we do every day. And that conversation about inspection doesn't come out of the blue. We're in relationship, or we should be in a relationship so we can be their fiduciary, which means that it's a continuous conversation. Things are constantly coming up and we're constantly explaining it. Often I say something like, I know you know this, and yet, and we go through it because I'm sure if they did know it, they've forgotten it, or wait, this comes into play now. So just constantly going through this. So by the time you get to inspections, they should be considering you a trusted resource. They should be now starting to rely on you and to listen to what you say and take it in and go, I didn't know that. Yeah, I know. That's why I'm explaining it to you very carefully. So really bring them along on the journey with you. It's going to serve you better as you go through these things, these little bumps that come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember that as adult learners, repetition is a must, right? If Donna says something to me one time in the midst of a whole lot of other things, she could call me the next morning and say, hey, remember that conversation we had about the whole inspection thing? And I struggle to remember exactly what she said. So it starts to underline the importance of repetition in conversation. It underlines the importance of having a conversation and then maybe going home and sending a follow-up email to simply say, hey, just wanted to outline what we talked about. Some important items to always remember, this, and this. Any questions, please give me a shout and we'll have a further conversation around it. Documenting those conversations, not only could it save you later on from the, well, you never told me that, right? It helps with the repetition from a learning process for the adults that we are helping move forward. Brett asked a question in the chat. Couldn't there be a contingency in the contract that says, if I don't like the outcome of X, I have a right to back out and get my money back? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Any contingency in the contract, generally speaking, when you wave the flag of that contingency as your reason for exit, it's simply built into and assumed in those contracts that the contingencies are your get out of jail free card where your monies are returned. Right? In the example that I was given, because it was my own personal example, that all those contingency I had waived. I didn't have any outs. I didn't have any other cards to play, except to bat my eyelashes and smile as hard as I could and say, please, pretty please, pretty please. And it worked. That's why I'm going to keep growing those eyelashes out, because I batted away and they said yes. Tony.
Oh, that's a tough act to follow. So we're talking about, I want to make sure I know what we're talking about here. We're talking about earnest money, right? Or are we talking about the actual deposit, like the 10% or the whatever?
We're talking, so yes and yes, either or.
Either or.
Yep,
Okay.
either or.
Okay. And I just, you talked yesterday about how to make your buyers look more attractive. Did you say that presenting a higher earnest money check would make them more attractive, or depositing more?
Uh, Both, right? So more money down, if you're financing, a lower mortgage amount is always more appealing to a seller than a higher mortgage amount, right? If you're at 60-40 versus 95-5 financing, the sellers typically respond differently to that. However, I also said that the initial check I write, for me personally, I don't do 1%. I do 10% of my offer. I push more money into the middle of the table faster, because I want the sellers to understand how serious I am and how confident I am that I'm not afraid to put that money, quote unquote, at risk.
So I realize we're in a crazy market right now, but I will also confess that scares me a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's remember, nobody ever promised us a rose garden. Marion put in the chat, in a competitive market, could contingencies jeopardize your offer? Yeah, absolutely. In a competitive market, could 1% down and not pushing more forward jeopardize your offer? Yes, absolutely. Is it riskier? Sure. No risk, no reward. And that's the game that I play, is no risk, no reward. You have to help buyers along that path sometimes, right? Which is why we've had a couple of different conversations around, if you're not really explaining to buyers what kind of a competitive environment they're getting themselves into, you might be in the makings of a complete meltdown at some point, when now a month later, when they're losing offers left and right, they're like, I don't understand. You're saying, no, you've got to do this, this, and this. And it feels more like an ambush, right? If you haven't set it up front, there's almost no way to say those kinds of strategies after the fact that doesn't sound like you trying to earn a commission off of them, instead of you trying to help them secure a property like that they have asked you to help them secure.
And obviously you don't make the decision, you just present the options and then say, what do you want to do?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Got it.
exactly right.
Okay.
Donna says, are they willing to do what it takes, right? The answers are either yes or no, and either one is okay, right? You're either willing to do what it takes, or you're not willing to do what it takes.
There are no wrong answers, there's only ramifications.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And the good news is it okay to say yes, even though that might be riskier than saying no? Sure, if that's their choice, they can say yes on those strategies and take that risk. Part of what I find is that we sometimes take their risk and put it on our shoulders. And I need you to remember that's dangerous. When you start to use pronouns like we, you've entered the realm of getting too emotionally involved, which doesn't allow you to be objective and help them objectively. Right? Well, we were expecting an answer back. I don't even love the term my clients. I know a lot of people use my clients. I use their names when I'm talking about them, because my clients, I think to some agents on the other side of the telephone, my client sounds confrontational. So I don't use that either. I prefer just to say, hey, you know what? The Gilberts are expecting an answer. I was just curious when that might occur. The second you go with the we, you're involving yourself in something that doesn't have anything to do with you. And I would be really careful about that. It's hard to stay objective when you shove yourself into it. You're more objective when you're on the outside looking in, and then you can help manage the emotion that oftentimes comes from the client. If you're in it with a we, Well, how do you manage emotion when you're in the middle of the emotion? Make sense? Marlene?
I never knew that the seller doesn't automatically get the deposit. The market that I was in previously in Massachusetts, as a broker, I was the one that held the deposit in escrow.
Mhm.
I would have assumed in your scenario of forfeiting the inspection contingency, that the seller would have asked for the deposit, and I would have automatically given that deposit to them. I had no idea about what you were talking about. It's, is this a Connecticut rule, or is it, across the country, or no one
Right,
else
so-
told me this?
Yeah, so the idea, I am a Massachusetts broker as well, and the answer about how money comes in and out of escrow, that's just the law of our country. That's not a state by state thing, right? That's a United States legal system thing. Might there be other rules? And again, I'm a Massachusetts broker for the last 21 minutes. So I still have a whole lot to learn about Massachusetts law. So I can't really speak specifically to how Massachusetts law may or may not make that different. So what I can speak to is Connecticut law quite confidently. Again, the in and out of escrow idea is not state by state, however. Right. And so I'll tell you, as a broker in 3 different states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York, when we held escrow until about 2 years ago when we made that shift. We would never put ourselves in a position to release money to anybody until or unless we had written authorization from both parties' attorneys. Right. And that drove some of the local attorneys nuts, which is why I think when we decided to be one of the first people to say, we don't want to hold escrow anymore, just give it to the attorneys, they were thrilled that we took ourselves out of that middleman position, because we were real pains in the you-know-what about getting clarity around the transaction. Because when a buyer or a seller or the other agent comes back to us and says, here's what's happened, just send the check there. Guess what? You send a check and then somebody comes a knocking and says, okay, so the good news is we have that money in escrow, right? Because I think the sellers are going to ultimately demand that money, and we're preparing a suit to get that taken care of. If you've already released it, guess who's on the hook for that money? You as the escrow agent.
Right.
So if all of a sudden if there's a demand for the money and I don't have it to pay, whoops. And trust me, if I've already given it to the buyer, that buyer is gone. I'm never seeing a dime from them, right? And I don't have any kind of vehicle in terms of a document to go after them with. I volunteered the money back to them. I just shouldn't have done that, right? Yeah. So that's all the back end of this. We're gonna move on from it now, but that's all the back end of all this. That is way more important than you may think. And so a basic understanding around it will simply help you speak to your clients rooted in the reality of what the process is and how the legal system works, so that you're not misleading either side and saying things like, don't worry, you can always get your money back, or don't worry, if they breach the contract, you get to keep their money, right? My hope is that after today, you won't say those things anymore. You have to speak a little more conditionally when you're having those conversations, and include their attorney. Make sense?
Yep. All
right. So let us continue on. So we're still at the bottom of page 2. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put the pedal to the metal to get through the bottom, the end of this document. Once you have all of the inspection reports back, right, you're going to review them with your buyer client, and you're going to come up with any kind of, now again, we're going to have this conversation as if the market moving so ridiculously fast isn't happening anymore. And a more normalized version of this is starting to show up in that you get the reports back, you have a conversation with the buyers, you help the buyers understand that the less they ask for, the more they will receive. Because that is a stated truth. The less they ask for, the more they will receive. You have to also help them understand that they're not buying a brand new house. They are buying a used house. And some of your clients are buying a really used house, right? It's been used for 100 years. It's been used for 75 years. When you buy a used car, I know we call them pre-owned now, certified pre-owned, I think, depending on the brand. However, they're used, right? Let's call it what it is. They're used cars. When you buy a used car, are the carpets always sparkly clean? They're as clean as can be. However, there's sometimes a stain on them. Is the body always scratch free or 100% dent free, right? They do their best to make it what it is. You spiff it up, but you're buying a used house, right? So there are certain things about buying a used house that you have to expect. If you're buying an older used house, if the inspector comes back and says, hey, there's no GFI outlets in any of the bathrooms or the kitchen, right? GFI outlets are those outlets that when water is introduced into the picture, automatically pop the circuit, right at the plug or the light switch. Well, again, in our state, we're in an as-is state. There's not a requirement for people to bring things up to today's code to sell their property. Think about that. Imagine if sellers had to do everything, catch up. They own a house from 1947. Imagine if a seller had to catch up and bring their house up to code for all the things that have occurred in the last 60 years, right? It's not realistic. And yet oftentimes buyers approach an inspection report as if that's their expectation. Well, there's no GFIs. Well, you need to put GFIs in or give me money to put GFIs in. No, I don't. Thanks for asking, but no. People have lived here for 75 years. We just keep plugging in the thing. And I can certainly advise, please don't use the toaster by the bathtub. Because if it falls in, that's a problem. And yes, there's no GFI. Or if you want to upgrade the electrical and go and get GFI outlets, you can certainly do that, right? So some of the smaller things and those are the things that come up a lot with buyers, right? There's smaller things that we have to help them understand. Is it town code today? Yes. When this house was built, no. And our state does not require people to update to code prior to the sale. So what could or should they ask for? Well, if it were me, I'd kind of list things from most important and most expensive to least important, least expensive. Pick the top 1 or 2 things and ask for those. And recognize that nearly everything else is it's just the process of becoming a homeowner, right? That's just what you signed up for when you said, yes, I want to spend $500,000 and buy, depending on where, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath raised ranch on an acre. That's 50 or 60 years old. That's just what you signed up for. And yet again, I don't mean to sound like you should be having conversations with your buyer to freak them out, because that's not my intent. However, one of the things that I don't think that we do all that well are have frank, truthful conversations with our buyers up front. And frank, truthful conversations are all about, look, I'm going to do everything I can to get you in that house if you've said yes, and fight for you the entire way. However, let's just fight within the parameters of what is reasonable and what you can expect. Here's what you can expect. Make sense? And then you present that over to listing agent. There might be some back and forth on it. Sometimes there are credits given. Sometimes the seller volunteers to go ahead and fix the stuff. Sometimes the seller comes back and says, no, thanks, I appreciate it. Do you still want to buy the house? Right. And if one of my techniques was with the buyer, when we came to agreement on what that list actually looked like, and again, shortened it up as much as possible, Oh, and please, cosmetic issues, please don't put them on an inspection list. Oh, the back porch needs painting. Yep, welcome to home ownership. There's your first 2 weekends. Take out your calendar. Right? Cosmetic issues, we're gonna be looking past those kinds of things. Remember that health and safety issues are not automatic. It's not, the seller has no legal responsibility to address anything, including radon, including tripping hazards, including cracks in foundations, including all the things that we sometimes think fall into those categories where we can wave the flag and say, oh, thank goodness. If they say yes, great. If they say, and you have to help buyers understand that when we push this back, if I send that list to Donna, here's what could happen. You should write this down because this is a really good strategy with whomever you're working with, buyer or seller. Here's what's going to happen next. That's the script. Here's what's going to happen next. If you will use that over and over and over again and over communicate, always give them the understanding of what's going to happen next. And I include here is the way this could go down, right? Option 1, 2, or 3. The sellers could come back and say yes, the sellers could come back and say no, the sellers could come back with a counter around this. So that when one of those 3 things happens, they're not surprised. You look like a genius because you told them one of those 3 things was going to happen. And then guess what? One of them happened. My goodness, who knew? Oh, that's right, you did. Which is why you went ahead and went on record to say these are the 3 things that are likely to happen. It just creates more and more confidence in you from the buyer, more and more confidence in you and your abilities, because every step of the way, you're telling them these are the things that are likely to happen, and then one of those things happens. Right? You don't have a crystal ball. You just do this enough to know what the answers are. Make sense? Moses, go ahead.
So with regards to GFCI and some of the other issues during the inspection. Now, if it's a FHA, how would that be handled? FHA loans.
Yes, that's a great question. I'm going to leave that answer. You will have for the first, remember, tomorrow we start at 4:30, not 4, right? So if you didn't write that down yesterday, write that down tonight. We start at 4:30 tomorrow, not at 4 o'clock. And for the first 20 to 25 minutes or so, you will have Karen Mulreed discussing ability to purchase and questions like Moses just asked, right? I'm going to allow Karen to have a conversation with you around how some of those issues with an FHA loan might need to be handled. She is far more expert at that. And some of my answer would be opinion and a little bit of guesswork. So I'm going to leave that to Karen. I will let her know, Moses, that you asked that question and make sure that we get that back to her. You're in a very dark room, Moses. My goodness, not even a little light from the window. I'm not sure how you could possibly see. All righty. So let's keep moving. So we're on the top of page 3, number 30. You're going to present in writing the inspection items to the listing agent. You're going to call to discuss them. You're going to have that back and forth. You're going to provide pages from the inspector's report to support some of the things that you may be concerned about or asking about, right? So that there's some backup. Here's what this inspector noted, right? I would encourage you, don't send the whole report for a bunch of different reasons. The seller didn't pay for it, the buyer did. And the listing agent is not interested in having to cull through. Every once in a while, as a listing agent, a buyer's agent would send me the whole report and say, yeah, we're concerned about these 3 things. Not with a little tab, not with on page 3, on page 9, on page 12. Like, do you expect me to go through this 26-page report and find backup for the things that your client is asking for? No, send me just the pages. Come on, let's work together here to fast track all of this. Right, so as a buyer's agent, you're going to help the seller's agent, the listing agent, see exactly where the issues might fall and what the inspector said about them. You're going to have those conversations back and forth until there's agreement. And once there's agreement, you're going to write down what everybody agreed to, make sure everybody signs the bottom of a piece of paper so that there's not selective amnesia come closing time, and make sure everybody has a copy of that short little document. Number 33, check in with the buyer and the buyer's mortgage loan officer and be certain that application has been made. Work with the buyer and assist in gathering any additional documents if they need for their loan, right? You want to just make sure if there's financing involved that the buyers are on top of that. I made that mistake one time. It's why that's in there. Where weeks went by, I never thought to ask the question. And all of a sudden, the listing agent called me and said, you know, we've still not heard anything about an appraisal. Like, what's going on? And I thought, yeah, that's weird. What's going on? And so I called the buyers and said, hey, have you heard anything about an appraisal? And they said, no, that's weird. We don't know what's going on. And I said, well, when did you make application? And they said, well, what does that mean? I said, wait, what? I said, after the accepted offer, you went back to the mortgage person, right? And said, we have an accepted offer and you made application for the loan, right? And they said, oh, no, were we supposed to do that? I thought, right? So again, there was an assumption on my part. By the way, whose issue was that? That's my issue, right? That's something that I allowed to fall through the cracks. Can't look at the buyers. They were first-time home buyers. They didn't know what they were doing. I made an assumption that I shouldn't have made because first-time home buyers previous to that made application without me asking them about it or reminding them. So I just made an assumption, which is why then it went into a checklist so that I always ask the question, have you made application? And 99.8% of the time, the answer is yes, or yes, of course, or what a silly question. However, that one time, luckily, it didn't delay the closing too much. But a solid 2 to 3 weeks went by before I uncovered the fact that they hadn't even made application. Like, that's bad on me, bad on me. Number 34, check in with the buyer, make sure that they've scheduled an appointment with their attorney to sign the contract. Right, so here's where all the plates start to spin. You're checking in on their financing. You're checking in with their attorney. You're checking in with them about their financing and about seeing their attorney. You're checking in with them on any other issues that they might be having. You're checking in with the listing agent to see if there's anything that they need on that side, right? You're checking, you're checking, you're checking, you're checking. You keep spinning the plates, and by the time you get to this end of the line of plates, guess what? You got to go back because the first one is starting to need another spin. So that's that process of keeping all the plates spinning at the same time. 35, be mindful of the dates that were laid out in the original offer to purchase or the contract and attempt to meet or exceed these dates. And so what I mean by that is there are dates in there that you have to have inspections done by. There are dates in there that you have to have a conversation about inspection results back to the listing agent by. There are dates in there about closing. There are dates in there about mortgage contingencies. Just because they're in the contract doesn't mean that that's not part of your world to know those dates and keep everybody aware of them. Right? It drives me a little bonkers when someone comes to me and says, well, you're not going to believe this. The attorney let the mortgage contingency expire. I said, oh my goodness, you're kidding me. Talk to me about that. How did they do that when you called them and reminded them about the fact that that the date was the next day? Well, I didn't call them. Oh, you're kidding. Why not? At some point, it's funny because people are apt to say to me, you know what, Rick, when you describe the job that is the job of getting from an accepted offer to a closing table, it sounds like you expect us to do everybody's job. And my answer to that is, oh, only if you want to get paid. If you're willing to put your client's satisfaction and your compensation in the hands of everybody else, then have at it. Assume that everyone's going to do what they're going to do. I learned real early, making those assumptions are costly. And you know what the worst part is? When somebody else doesn't do something, guess who it comes back on? It comes back on you because you're their agent. You're the one who's supposed to have all the answers and have it all figured out and keep everything foundationally moving forward, right? So again, that's why this checklist exists. It's why I'm explaining to you all these steps to say, yeah, you need to be checking in and 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 checking in. Your job is everybody else's job. Not necessarily day by day, but certainly from a make sure everyone is on the right track and on the right path perspective. John Mendez.
This kind of confused me a little bit, especially after this what was it, afternoon's class on the transaction coordinator
Yes.
part of the thing. So I'm still kind of confused as to like the transaction coordinator, how they come into play. I know we're supposed to be like kind of like the quarterback of everything, being the agent. At least what I thought was, if you do decide to hire a transaction coordinator and leverage out things that you'll have to be you can take your hands kind of off a lot.
Yeah, so let me answer that. So yes, you're 100% right. I'm explaining things as if there were no additional person involved. If in fact you decide to move in the direction of having a transaction manager manage your transactions, well, after the acceptance of the offer, a lot of the things that we're talking about would be handled by the transaction manager, and you would just be checking in kind of weekly. You'll be in high communication with the transaction manager and certainly weekly with the client, not to lose that relationship. And yet a lot of the detail work that we're talking about would be handled by the transaction manager. That is 100% true. This conversation is, here's what needs to be done. In some circumstances, you will be the one doing it all. And in other circumstances, you may choose to leverage some of that out. Does that help?
Yeah, and then I had another question. Then if you do decide to use a transaction coordinator to like leverage some of that out, would you have to use like their attorneys and stuff like that, or would you still go with like your own attorneys, but the transaction coordinator is just like the main contact point for all of them?
So are you asking, do you still use your team?
Yeah.
Yeah, you use your team, and then the transaction coordinator just knows who your team is, and they're in contact with them. Most transaction managers don't have a team that they will recommend. That's still going to rest with you as the agent.
Okay.
It's going to come from you, and then you'll work with the transaction manager if you choose to hire one to work with all of your people. All right, 36, once application's been made on the financing side, check with the buyer and loan officer to make sure the appraisal's been ordered, right? That's that next step. Now the appraisal has to be ordered. Generally speaking, depending on if you're working in Fairfield County, for the most part, you, the buyer's agent, are going to be meeting the appraiser at the house. If you work outside of Fairfield County and in certain pockets inside of Fairfield County, the listing agent is more customarily meeting the appraiser at the house. So don't be freaked out if you're in and out of the county, if it seems different, because it is different, right? It's one of the beauties of buying in Waterbury, because that's New Haven County. And for 20 years, I was always the one going to the appraisals, and you buy in Waterbury and the listing agent's like, well, just let me know when the appraisal has to happen. I'll meet them there. I'm like, woohoo, I don't have to drive to Waterbury, right? So it's a beautiful thing. Don't be freaked out. Inside of Fairfield County, generally speaking, buyer's agents are meeting. It's not a law, right? If Donna and I are doing a transaction and I absolutely have a logjam of a schedule and I'm unable to meet the appraiser, and I don't have anybody in my world to do that on my behalf, I may call Donna and say, I am just so stuck here. The appraisal is tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Is there any way you could let the appraiser in? Right? Because Donna and I are working together to move everyone forward to the same conclusion. And right, it's in her best interest and her client's best interest to have that go off without a hitch as well. So we utilize each other at times. But be mindful of, that's the next step, right? Now you have an appraisal that needs to get met and get done. Erica.
Is there a reason why the appraisal notification goes to the seller and not to the buyer when the buyer is the one purchasing the appraisal?
Okay, ask that question again, because you sound a little bit like you're underwater. Is there a reason why?
Sorry, I'm in a jam. Is there a reason why the appraisal notification goes to the seller and a listing agent and not the buyer and the buyer agent?
I am sorry, I am struggling understanding the question. Is there a reason why the appraiser is contacting, is that what you said, contacting the listing agent, not the buyer's agent?
Yeah, I came into another room. So when you initially do the appraisal, the buyer pays for it. The notification goes to the seller. Why does the notification go to the seller and the listing agent versus going to the buyer who is paying for the appraisal?
Got it. So the notification goes to whomever you instruct the lender to let the appraiser contact. Right? I always, even though when I buy in Waterbury, the listing agent is going to meet the appraiser there, I always direct my lender to have the appraisers contact me. So that you drive that bus, you and the buyers drive that bus. Whoever you tell the lender to have the appraiser contact is who they will contact. If in fact you tell them nothing, sometimes the appraiser will look up the property in the MLS that they're going to appraise and whose name is at the bottom, the listing agents. So that's oftentimes why they will call the listing agent, not the buyer's agent, if they haven't been given any direction, because they go to the MLS and contact the person at the bottom of the sheet. If that helps. But all you have to do is indicate who you want contacted, and the appraisal will contact whoever they're told to contact.
Okay, I was working with a buyer and I was speaking and having conversations with her, the mortgage broker that she was using. And they just like automatically off the rip was like, okay, well, the notification for the appraisal is gonna go to the seller. So just let them know that it's gonna come to them and to notify you. And of course, the seller literally notified me, the listing agent notified me like 5 minutes before the appraisal was, supposed to take place. So I just thought I thought it was automatic. I thought it was kind of weird, but
yeah, well, that is weird. And if it was certainly if it was a purchase inside of Fairfield County, I'm not sure why that would have been done. But yeah, you and the buyers, as the buyer's agent, you and the buyers get to direct that. And so if someone came to me and said that's going to go to the seller, I would just hold my hand up and say, no, that's going to get lost that way. Here's who you need to contact. I want that person to be contacting me so it doesn't get lost. So it's in everybody's best interest to have them contact the person who's actually going to be handling the situation. So just sometimes we hear things and we're not sure if they're kosher or not. In that scenario, don't be afraid to say, yeah, no, let's not do it that way. I'd like to have this done this way because I'm going to be the one who's handling that. There's no reason they can't just change the telephone number and the name on the order. And of course, you're going to meet the appraiser at the house, and you're going to the appraiser is going to do their job. You're going to bring a couple of comps, right, in an envelope and just hand them to the appraiser without making a big deal about it. Sometimes appraisers with appraisal management companies, sometimes we don't get a local appraiser to come appraise the property. So those appraisers, even though they're not supposed to accept your comps and look at them, they likely will, right? Because sometimes they need some help. So don't be afraid. Again, don't make a big deal out of it. Don't like sit down and have a request a summit about the comps. However, you can pull the best 3 sold comps, put it in an envelope and say, I had some extras. If these are helpful, thanks so much, right? Point out when you're in the house with the appraiser, point out things that the appraiser might miss. If there's a finished 3rd floor and you access it through one of the bedroom, closets, well then make sure you show them that. If there's a finished lower level, make sure you show them that. If there's something new out back, brand new deck out back, well, point those things out because they matter. Other than that, you're there kind of to just let them in and then lock up later. Number 38, call the buyer and let them know that the appraisal has been done. Advise them to call their loan officer and request that a copy of the appraisal is sent to them for review. 39, once the mortgage has been approved, be certain that the buyers and the loan officer and or the processor have a handle on the conditions that will need to be met in order to obtain a clear to close from the lender. Understand nowadays, mortgage contingencies or mortgages are, it's a two-step process. You are conditionally approved first, and then you're clear to close. Right? So conditionally approved means the underwriter has all that they need, and we can close in 3 weeks like we're supposed to. However, before we close, we're going to do a couple of things, right? So always remind your buyer clients that stuff is going to get done prior to the closing, like they're going to pull credit again. So like, don't stop paying your car payments and your mortgage between now and the closing date. They're also going to likely do a verification of employment again right before the closing. So please don't decide that you don't like your job and quit your job 3 weeks before the closing, which you say, well, who would do that? I will tell you that last year we actually had that issue occur. Somebody decided they just couldn't stand their job any longer. They were in the process of buying a house. It was 3 weeks before the closing, and they quit their job. And so 3 days before the closing, when the lender went and did a verification of employment and found out they weren't employed, they came back and said, okay, guess what? You're not clear to close. Like, dude, really? You couldn't wait 3 more weeks? You worked there for 5 years. What was so bad? Call out sick for half the time, for goodness sake. Like, do what you have to do. Quit after the fact. I mean, come on. At any rate, you just want to remind them that but the process of purchasing a house and obtaining financing is not over until after the closing. Number 40, check in with the listing agent to make sure that the inspection repairs are moving along, right? That's always a really interesting conversation. Donna calls me and says, hey, Rick, I just want to make sure that the inspection repairs that we have agreed to on 123 Main Street are in full swing, because it looks like we're getting ready to close in about 2 weeks. I know for certain there are times where I've gotten that phone call and I thought, oh, yeah, everything's going just great. Thanks so much. I hung up the phone and said, crap, I have no idea. I better call the sellers and find out what's going on, right? I know there are times where I've made that phone call where even though I was told, yes, everything's hunky-dory, that same thing happened. So it's just a reminder phone call to make sure that we don't get to 24 hours before a closing and everyone's running around with their hair on fire because the X didn't get corrected or the Y didn't get fixed or updated or whatever, right? 41, check in with the office to make sure that, now again, this piece you're going to cross out because now we're giving our good faith deposit, our 1% or whatever percent you're using, to the attorney. However, you still want to check in with the MCA and make sure that the invoice has gone out. Our invoicing system is automatic. It happens 2 to 4 weeks before your scheduled closing based on the information that you give us. You don't have to ask us to invoice. However, I'd like to know that it was done, so that, and what I'm talking about is the market center invoices the closing attorney for your commission. Closing attorneys don't just automatically pay a commission, they pay off of an invoice. And so we take the information you've given us about what the sale price is and what the commission rate is, and we create an invoice and we send that to the closing attorney so that you can get paid at the closing. It's just another step in the process. It's an invisible step to you most of the time. However, I like to keep my finger on the pulse of everything that's happening just in case. And so it's just part of my checklist. I want to just check in with Sam or check in with Lisa and just make sure that it went out. Oftentimes they will copy you on what goes out. So you may already know what's gone out or not. However, if they didn't, or you didn't see it, check in. 42, if there is a gap in between all of the above happening and the actual closing date, make sure that you maintain communication with the buyer. A minimum phone call pattern of once a week should be set up and never compromised. Set up a system of connections and communication that might include A, just routine check-in. Hey, how's it going? B, a reminder about transferring mail services from where they are to where they're going. A reminder about getting a new license at DMV if in fact their address has changed, or if they're coming from out of state, right? They have to get a new license. Check in that, make sure that they have a good source for movers if they haven't taken care of that. Do they need more boxes? Do they need someone to come and clean the house after they've finished moving out? Or are they doing that themselves? And then again, a reminder about the whole financing thing in G, that they can't open any lines of credit or quit their job or have any adverse experience that could put their loan in jeopardy. Here's the point. The point is constant communication creates confident clients. So you don't want to be hot and heavy with communication and then drop it for a month because you're in this pending period, and then all of a sudden decide to get hot and heavy just before the closing. It's the perfect way to send a message that they're only important to you for the actual closing check, right? That's not a great way to maintain relationships. So you're going to stay in constant communication, because then if something goes sideways, you're there, you're able to manage it. You're also sending the message that these people are important to you throughout the entire process. About a week or so prior to the scheduled closing, begin to set up for the actual closing day. And this includes confirming the date and time and the location of the closing, right? The days of you attending most closings are pretty much over, just by the way. And you'll see when you turn the page here, it says go to the closing. That happens very rarely nowadays, right? Because closings are, they used to be, just in case you've never experienced this, they used to be one date, one location, one time, the buyers and the sellers and both, and their attorneys and the agents, and like everybody and their sister came to the closing table to all sit around, hold hands, sing kumbaya, and pass keys around. I kind of miss those days personally. And yet I understand that in a more fast-paced world, now things are done more digitally and electronically. So one client meets with their attorney, the other client meets with their attorney, and the attorneys just kind of pass the papers back and forth digitally, wire the funds, and it's all good. However, you do still need to set up a walkthrough. Let's talk a little bit about what the walkthrough is for and what it looks like. John, you have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask. So one thing I see like a lot of realtors that are closing deals and use social media do is like they post a photo with their clients on closing day. Is that actually on closing day, or is that like a day after or something, like when they get their keys or something?
So I'll answer that question in a couple of bullet points. So let's get there. So number 44, arrange for the final walkthrough. The final walkthrough is done from the perspective of the buyers for a couple of reasons. They want to go and make sure that the home that they saw at the inspection is still the same home, right? They want to make sure that everything that was supposed to be left was left. Everything that was supposed to be removed has been removed. Any repairs that were supposed to be done based on the agreement that they had after inspection conversations have been repaired, and that the major systems of the house are in working order. The last thing they want to do at the walkthrough is just check that in the whole move out process, the house wasn't damaged in any way. Right, I one time went to a walkthrough in Weston with clients who were first-time home buyers, and we pulled up these poor young kids. My goodness, it had rained and rained and rained and rained and rained for like 10 days prior to this closing, and the driveway for this house was really kind of serpentine. It was not a straight driveway. It was a long serpentine, squiggly line driveway. Well, the big 18-wheeler that they had come to pack up this house couldn't do the whole serpentine driveway thing. So they just kind of backed up straight, which means every time that they went off the driveway, the wheels sunk into the wet grass like 1.5 feet. And they just barreled through, tore up the lawn on both sides, and then barreled out and tore it up even more. It was horrible. So there was that issue, and then just left it. Didn't say anything and just left it. And then we went into the house, and it was this beautiful, like round, curved staircase down into the foyer from the second floor. Curved enough that when you have really large furniture, if you're not careful carrying it down the big curved staircase, one of the legs of the couches punches a hole in the wall and then you drag it down the wall. There was like this 3-foot gash in the wall, clearly from like the leg of a sofa or some kind of furniture, left with like no notice. Like, okay, really? So remember, you're there for the reasons I just stated. Here's what you're not there for. Oh my goodness, there's a little tiny hole in the wall here from where they had a picture and they didn't spackle it and sand it and repaint the whole wall for me. So I think I need to call my attorney, right? That's normal wear and tear. A big gash in the front foyer, not normal wear and tear. So what happens if you have issues at the walkthrough? Well, you take photos of them, you forward them to the attorney, and you allow the attorney to work with the other attorney to figure out how that's going to get solved, right? Sometimes there's a credit issued, sometimes there's money held in escrow so that the new buyer can go and repair something. I just bought a house from my own property managers. And one of the things that we agreed to was there was a lot of crap on the property. They were to remove all of that prior to the closing because I didn't want to take possession with all somebody else's crap on the property, because then it's my dime to remove it. And there was a bunch of front porch work that was supposed to get done. And so we had an agreement with time periods. The front porch work didn't get done prior to the weather setting in. And so because I know them and they're going to manage the property after I close on it anyway, we had an agreement that we would just simply hold money in escrow, $5,000 in escrow, until that work was done, such that if it's not done by April the 1st, the $5,000 is then released to me so I can go and hire someone else to go and do the work, right? So that's how things that happen at closing can sometimes be addressed, right? Jonathan, did you have a question or did I answer it?
Nah, yeah, you answered. I just wanted to know what you did in that situation, but yeah, you answered it. Thank you.
Got it. And Brett's asking, wouldn't the moving company be responsible and have to pony up? Well, here's the answer to that. If I represent the buyers in that scenario, I don't care. I don't care who's going to pay for it. It's not my issue to solve that. At the closing table, it's the seller's responsibility to convey the property the way it's supposed to be conveyed. If the seller then goes and says, I hired you moving company and you screwed up my property, that's between the seller and the moving company. So maybe the seller recuperates that back from the moving company. At the closing table, if I'm advocating for buyers, there's only one person to look at, and that's the seller, right? Does that help answer that? Remember, you always have to, in any situation, you have to follow the line of who hired who. Like where does the documentation lead you? The buyers can't go to the moving company. The buyers can only go to the seller. The seller can then go back to the moving company if they so choose. Okay, so we kind of did 44 and 45 and 46. 47, as I said, that's been a big change in the last number of years, and that we're just really not attending closings anymore. You may want to, depending on how quickly you want to process have your check processed, you may want to make a phone call to the attorney's office to say, hey, I'll stop by and pick up the check, right? Because or else what happens is they mail the checks. And I don't know how familiar you are with the US Postal Service and how reliable that all is, right? But I wouldn't want my checks mailed if I was interested in having them processed quickly, right? We promise you a 48-hour turnaround from the moment we get the check to the time it's processed and we push the button to send it off to your direct deposit. Some of you have it within 48 hours. Some of you don't, and that's something that has to do with your bank. Sometimes your bank doesn't deposit direct deposits, ACH deposits, as quickly as others, right? Every once in a while we get a call from an agent saying, it's taking like 3 or 4 or 5 days for me to get the money direct deposit. Like, I get it. I can't answer why. We push the button with you and everybody else at the exact same time. Everybody else seems to show up the next morning, and every once in a while, somebody's bank just takes extra time. That's something on your bank's side. That's a question you can ask. That may be a reason to switch banks, depending on how important that is to you. But do note that that's the turnaround time. But we can't promise you your money until we actually receive the money. So if you want to fast track that, going and grabbing your closing checks and delivering them to your offices to either Sam or to Lisa, can be very, very helpful in fast tracking that. And then, of course, we have follow-up, right? Because you've now closed the property. 48 says obtain a written or video testimonial from that person. That's really kind of big. You want as many testimonials as you possibly can. I love the video testimonial. And the day of the closing is kind of the best time to get them because everyone's happy and smiling and right. So grab those, follow up with your clients within 48 hours of the closing to make sure that everything is okay. And then follow up within the first week, and then follow up within the first 30 days. So within the first 30 days, after you sell a house, you're going to follow up at least 3 times. Once 2 days later, once within 7 days, and once within 30 days. Talk to me about that schedule. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, what are some things you experienced? You know, has any type of trouble come up after the closing? You know, after everyone's moved in and stuff like that. Any type of problems that popped up?
Thank you for asking that, because the answer is absolutely, right? Absolutely, because you just can't figure out like when the wheel of misfortune might actually stop, and stuff happens, right? Which is exactly the reason why Jonathan just asked the question that answers my question, which was going to be, why would you make a phone call 48 hours later? Why would you make another follow-up phone call within 5 days or so, so it's within 7 days? So within the first week, you're making 2 communications. And then certainly again within the first 30 days. Why would you, well, it seems like a lot. Well, it seems like a lot until or unless the buyers, the second day they're in the house, have their dishwasher explode and it's leaking all over the kitchen floor, right? And so you're calling to check in to make sure that there's nothing that you can help with. Agents don't do it because, right, there's lots of different kinds of guilt, right? You've heard of like Jewish guilt and Catholic guilt, and like there's all those kinds of different guilts. Well, this is realtor guilt. I've never seen a guiltier bunch than our industry. And what I mean by that is we don't make those follow-up calls because we somehow think that if something went wrong the day after the closing, that we're somehow responsible. Here's what I can tell you. Unless you went over to the house and caused the dishwasher to explode, it's not your fault, right? So,
right, going on top of the, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So the idea of checking in, you check in to make sure that everything's going okay. And if something's not going okay, you offer resources, you offer some assistance. Oh my goodness, was there a home warranty with that? Did you call the home warranty company? Here's who you should call. Did you turn off the water? Did you call a plumber, right? Maybe they're calling you directly to say, oh my goodness, the dishwasher just exploded, what do I do? And then you have those resources to give to them. So you're calling to check in from a resource perspective, and because you don't want them to think that they were only important to you up to and including the time that you got your money. You're checking in to see how they're doing. What's the story is. How can you help? How can you help? How can you help? Even post-close. After 30 days, they're just in your 36 touch program now. So after 30 days, they're receiving something from you every week or 2 anyway. And you're now in rotation with them to contact them face-to-face or phone-to-phone every 90 days, because that's part of your 36 touch program with your entire database, right? So it's not like you call 3 times in the first month and then never again. They just get pushed into that system that you have, and then there's constant communication through that system. What else, Jonathan? Did I not answer your question?
No, yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And so I think, yeah, I think that brings us through the anatomy of a buyer transaction. Any questions that I can help with before we move on to our mastering the buyer consultation scripts? Okay, so again, I give that to you. Go ahead, Tony.
This is embarrassingly obvious, but I wish somebody had sort of reminded me, and that is, I've become a recent adoptee or adopter of the Google Planner, and put everything on it. Don't leave anything to this.
Yeah, we
it's
have a
easy.
great,
Yeah.
we have a great class coming up. It's on the 15th. If you saw it on the calendar, we're going to have Joe McHugh and Christy Biasi teach us about all the cool Google apps that are out there, all the cool Googles, like all the Google Forms and the Google stuff. And there are so many Google tools that can help you with streamlining a lot of this, checklisting some of it, calendarizing a lot of it. There's so much out there that many of us don't even know it exists. And it's the easiest path forward with a lot of this. So they're going on the 15th at 1 o'clock, just before family reunion starts later that week. We're going to have them come. So right here in the Zoom room, you can write that down if you're interested in learning more about some Google opportunities that you might have. Thank you for mentioning that. All right, so that's the process. Where does it all start? That's what we're going to spend the 30 minutes that we have left tonight talking about, as well as the hour from 5 to 6 tomorrow. As I mentioned, we start at 4:30 tomorrow, not 4 o'clock, and I will be joining you just at 5 o'clock. So you'll have me for an hour, Karen for the first half hour, to get your fix of all things mortgage ability and FHA questions. Moses, don't forget that question, because again, I'll let her know that I'm going to, oh, he's on the phone, so I'll let her know. So the idea of where does it all start? Well, after you generate a lead and have an appointment with that lead, right? The idea of setting, so to be clear, the class is still going to be over at 6. So it's 4:30 to 6. We're not shifting. 6 o'clock is late enough for everybody. I'm not going to torture you for another half hour. So we'll work 4:30 to 6. I'll be here for the last hour, 5 to 6 on Thursday, tomorrow. So where does it all start? It starts with a valid, proper, comprehensive buyer consultation. And so I want to say that again, because I think sometimes people hear that and think, well, yeah, of course, that sure. Why is he saying that out loud? Or, well, yeah, that when it's convenient, we can do it that way. And yet when it's not convenient, we're going to do it a different way. And I'm going to tell you guys something that you're going to hear this first before all of your colleagues, because I'm in the process of writing our annual risk reduction sessions for early March. And in the process of writing that course, I've made a decision. So I'm going to say what I just said first, and then I'm going to tell you my decision. And the decision comes from something that recently occurred, and it's kind of been a building process. So where does all this start? You lead generate, you have somebody raise their hand, you set the appointment, and you set the appointment for a valid, comprehensive, end-to-end, using a script and the tools that we're going to talk about, buyer consultation. That's where you start with a buyer every single time. To me, it's a non-negotiable. The fact that people skip those consults, it's no wonder you struggle selling people a house. How could you possibly perform at a level that allows you to fulfill the needs of someone in an efficient and effective manner if you have no idea what those needs are? Because you never took the time to sit and have an actual consult to uncover those needs. Here's another question. Why would someone hire you for all the things that you want to be hired for which I'm thinking is not the person who has the key to the house who flips the lights on. You want to be hired for the skill and the value you bring to the entire process. Why would someone, or how can someone hire you if you're not having a consultation to be able to explain what that value is? Now you're just hoping they hire you because they think you can have the key and flip the lights on, right? Be careful about the devaluing of you and your services, because it's not the buyers who do that. You do that to yourselves by not setting proper expectations and demanding may be a strong word, although I think I'll stick with it, right? Demanding a buyer consult up front. Let me ask you this. Would you hire an attorney to represent you in a litigation case that could stretch on for 6 or 9 months, where there's hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake, without sitting down and having that attorney talk with you about how this is going to work, what their policies are, what their cost is, what their experience has been, strategies they've used to win, how all this works, what the process is? No, of course you wouldn't. Right? We even have an expectation when we go to the emergency room that there's going to be at least, unless we're literally bleeding out, right? Then it's like, okay, I don't care who does it, somebody sew me up, right? However, you still have an expectation, certainly with a doctor that you're seeing for a well visit or something that's less of an emergency, that you're going to have a consult. There's going to be a discussion. There's going to be education. There's going to be questions and answers, and right? So be careful you're not devaluing your own business. And here's the thing that fascinates me the most. People who choose not to have buyer consults and then choose to blame the buyer contract as the reason why someone didn't hire them. Oh, well, I took that buyer contract out and they ran in the opposite direction. Yeah, here's what I can tell you. I have, and for those of you who know me, I don't use this word very often. However, it is accurate in this situation. I have never, that's the word I don't use very often because it's kind of an absolute. And yet I have never had someone run in the opposite direction when I asked them to hire me after it followed a comprehensive buyer consult. That's never happened to me in 22 and a half years of practicing real estate. My bet is that Donna, has that ever happened to you?
It's never happened, and it'll be 20 years this Saturday.
Now, I can tell you, when I didn't do a comprehensive, so that's a different answer for me if you ask me, has it ever happened to you? Yes. Have I struggled getting people to sign a contract? Yes. Only when I hauled that form out and didn't preface it with a comprehensive buyer consult. Like when I chose to meet somebody at a house and whipped out the form and put it on the trunk of my car and said, you can't go in until you sign here. And that's how a lot of agents run their businesses. They know the rules. For some of them, following the rules is important. For some, it's not. Please note, having a signed buyer agreement, if you're showing property to somebody, is not optional. It's the way our law is written. So it's one of the fastest ways. If something goes sideways and you're representing somebody and you don't have a valid agreement to represent them, one of a couple of things could happen. If something goes really sideways, you're in a whole bucket of you know what, because now the state can come in and say, okay, if you don't even respect the basics of our laws about representation, you don't deserve a license. Thank you. Or you can get fined or suspended. Or you could be asked to go find a new brokerage, because guess what? When you do that, it affects all of us. Because then I get sucked into the picture. So I don't mean to start the whole buyer consult thing with like dun, 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 doom and gloom and make it sound heavy and negative. However, I want to be clear about how important what we're about to do actually is. The listing consultation and the buyer consultation, to me, are the linchpins of our business. Without them, what are we? So take it massively seriously. Want to know the decision I made that I told you were going to hear first? So the decision I have made, for those of you who know me for more than even 10 minutes, you know that I take very seriously the money that you earn, right? As your partner in this business, when your money is as important to me as my own, right? And that's something I take very, very seriously. And to that, when we sign contracts with our clients, I take those contracts seriously and I fight for your commissions. Here's the decision I've made. As much as I am good at fighting for your commissions, and as much as your money is important to me, if there's a buyer who comes to me and says, I'm not happy, I want out, instead of doing all the things I normally do to make sure that your commission is as safe and saved as possible, if I find out that no valid comprehensive buyer consult has been done, I am just going to start granting their wishes and canceling their contracts. Because I no longer believe that it is fair of me as a broker to hold people to contracts that were either never explained to them, or hold them to working with one of our own agents when one of us chose to kind of spoil it for everybody by not doing the thing that, as we just said, is the linchpin of the whole buyer relationship. So if there was no buyer consult and somebody wants out, my new path is going to be allowing them out. And that will likely, so when I say it again at risk reduction, that's going to cause a stir. However, I believe that it is the fairest thing to do for all people involved. Remember, in my position, I not only have to answer to you, but I have to answer to every single one of our clients. I'm the guy in the middle of all those relationships. And so I feel good about that decision, simply because what I know is if you did have a valid, comprehensive buyer consultation, my ability and my resolve to hold them into that contract makes far more sense. I don't have to feel weird about holding them into something that they really didn't understand to begin with, because no one took the time to explain it. So I actually think it helps me help those of you who take that seriously more. And for those who choose not to take it seriously, I'm sorry, you got to give me the tools to work with. If your income has to be as important to you. So anyway, that's the decision I have made. We'll rock the boat together in a couple of weeks when I announce that to the market centers. But that's the direction that I'm going in. And I'm going to tell you something that just recently happened in the last 48 hours, just kind of put the nail in the coffin for me, or awakened me to that decision, I should say it more positively. Because it was literally on the trunk of the car in the driveway. Here's what I can tell you. No judge would uphold the obligation to pay a commission when they found out you did it in the driveway on the back of the trunk. Doesn't hold water. All right, so that being said, everyone's like, what an upper he is today. However, look, if we don't start this conversation with the foundation of just how truly important it is, my fear is that you get to the end of it and say, whew, that's a lot of words. Maybe I could do this differently. Maybe I could shortcut this process. Let's not do that. Right? Let's not do that. So you do have your Mastering the Buyer Consultation scripts. I did ask you to kind of print those or take a look at those so that when we started working with them, they were a little bit more familiar to you. If you don't have them, they are in that link. I'll put the link in the chat again. It's called Mastering the Buyer Consultation. There's your link again for those of you who need it. And we're going to start with step number one, which is setting the stage, right? You've made an appointment with a buyer. I will tell you that one of the things that the last 2 years has, or the last 20 months or so, has brought our way that I kind of love and encourage at this point is the idea that you can do the consult before you actually are meeting them to show them houses on the weekend, right? And what I mean by that is you can make it a two-step process. Because let's be clear, as important as the buyer consultation is, most buyers are most interested in doing what when they meet with you? Going out,
Seeing how,
right? Yeah, they didn't make a phone call to you to say, oh, I hope she asks me to sit down and have a 45-minute conversation around my wants and needs and discuss the process and the legal forms. I'm praying that she's going to say that, right? That doesn't happen. So what sometimes happens is you feel that pressure to get them out seeing houses, because frankly, that's what you want to do too, right? I don't blame you. That's kind of the fun part. Though what I want you to start to recognize is that where the skill comes into play, if you can make the consults part of the fun and bring a level of skill to that, you'll have even more fun building the relationship with them as they see property, as you find a property, and as you guide them to a closing. So one of the things that the whole COVID experience has brought to the table is the idea of Zoom buyer consults, right? Because 2 years ago, what I would have sat here and said to you is, it's a come into the office experience, right? The idea is you set an appointment. We're going to go and see these couple of properties on Saturday. However, let's meet at 10:30. We do have some conversations and some paperwork to complete prior to us seeing some property. And you have the buyer consult then and there prior to seeing the property. What we have found works kind of better is you can make some, so it's Monday night, or what's today? Tuesday? What is today? Wednesday night, thank you. Eventually I would have guessed the right day. So it's Wednesday night. We made the appointment with the buyer for Saturday at 12 noon. However, in between, let's set an appointment for tomorrow at 7 or tomorrow at 6 for a Zoom opportunity for us to get to have the buyer consult and handle some of the discussion and paperwork up front, so that we can get right to seeing property on Saturday, right? And that works really, really, really well. People kind of like it. They're saving their weekend time, right, for seeing those couple of houses and seeing you in person. They're excited about that. They can kind of do the stuff that they don't know that they're going to love ahead of time. You get to maximize your time on the weekends as well, right? If you're working with a whole bunch of buyers, or you're doing open houses and buyers, right, that 45 minutes with each buyer could be valuable to you. So if you get that done during the week. So I love the idea of splitting it into two and having most of the consult in a Zoom meeting ahead of time, complete with getting them some documentation via DocuSign, which by the way is different, because here's the other thing that happened in the last couple of days. Somebody else came to me and said, we made an offer on a house, and the only thing that was said about the contract was that it would be included in all the paperwork that was being DocuSigned to me. There was never any other mention of it. There was never a conversation. There was never a question and answer period. There was no consult. It was meet you at the house, show you the house. I have to go. I'm going to DocuSign you all these papers. You click the button and sign all the little dots. Now remember, these buyers are interested in purchasing a home. If they don't know the right process, they're just going to do what you asked them to do, and they pushed all the buttons. Do you think they read all those pieces of paper? Of course not. Electronic signing is powerful in one respect and really dangerous in another respect. So if you are being hired via Zoom, my expectation then is Don and I are having a Zoom consult. When it gets to the hiring stage, I'm going to send you via email, not via DocuSign just yet, send you a PDF so that we can review the contract, answer any questions around it. Do you have any questions? Great. Is this a path you'd like to go down? I'd love it if we could be in business together. Yes, we want to hire you. Awesome. I'm going to now follow up in DocuSign, push the button, send, while I'm still on Zoom with Donna. Did you get it? Yes. Great. Again, any other questions? Nope. Okay, you're gonna initial at the bottom, you're going to sign the second page, and then you're going to literally walk through it with them. Yeah, see, Donna says share the screen and walk through it like we are together, right? I love that. I love that even better. So that there's a question and answering opportunity, and then they sign it with you in the same Zoom room. It doesn't happen later on, right? To me, that's how you get the Zoom thing really tight, so that you're not at risk of nobody ever told me, nobody explained it to me. Here's the other benefit. You can also record the Zooms, so that just in case anything ever comes back that says, we didn't talk about that, nobody ever told me, well, you have a recording. By the way, you're going to announce that you're recording the session, right? Here's the other cool news about recording the session. You get to watch it back after you're done and learn from listening and watching yourself. Some of you are literally diving out the window in back of you when I say that. And here's what I can tell you. I understand that. However, there is nothing that has taught me more about what I do and how I do it and how I might need to adapt to be better than watching and listening to myself back in a recorded version of something. It's a really powerful, powerful tool, right? And here's what I learned. After the first couple of times, it just is what it is. If it bothers you, it's only going to bother you the first couple of times. And here's the real kicker. Here's the thing to remember. That's what you look like, and that's what you sound like. So all the rest of us just look and say, yep, that's you. You're the only one who's like, oh my goodness, look at my hair and my thing and my sound, my voice is this and that. That's just what you look like and what you sound like. That's what we all see every single day, and we love you. So like, get over it, right? Move on, moving forward. So setting the stage, page number 1. If it's all right with you, I'd like to kind of work just through that real quickly in our remaining minutes. And the idea is, this is designed for meeting somebody in the office. If you're going to do the Zoom version of this, you'll adapt some of this because you obviously won't be in the same physical space as them. However, if there's one thing I think we've all gotten really good at is making those adaptations so that it's not weird that we're on Zoom. It's like we're in the same physical space, even though we're not. So let's start with, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I'm Rick Scott. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm just curious, did you have any trouble finding the office? No? Great. Excellent. So before we get started, can I get you some water or something to drink? And if they say yes, you do that. If they say no, you don't. So we're sitting in the conference room, right? This is just kind of small talk that I have scripted out to get us from either the front desk area to the conference room, or just I've walked into the conference room to shake hands and say hello. I like having that scripted out. I'm not great personally at small talk. And so I prefer to have that scripted out. And even if you are great at small talk, it's beneficial for you to have that scripted out, because if some of you are so good at small talk that you might small talk for 20 minutes. And now people are like, oh my goodness, like, are we ever going to get to business here? Right? So be careful. It's a blessing and a curse, and you have to use it in proportion to what you're attempting to accomplish. So moving forward through this, I am really excited to start this home search process with you today. First, I am going to turn my cell phone off so that we do not have any interruptions. I'm going to do that. Why am I doing that?
To show them that you're giving them undivided attention.
You got it, Jonathan. Undivided attention is massively important, right? You literally just met these people. You're setting the stage. How many people in the last 12 months of your life have you sat down to have a conversation with who said, you know what, I'm going to turn my cell phone off so I can pay close attention to you? How many people have done that to you? I can't think of a one who's done it to me. And that's simply because I haven't met with any of you for a buyer consult, right? But think about if no one's done it to you in the last 12 months, that's likely that no one's done it to them. And so it stands out. It sends a loud message. You want to that's kind of that first wow of, boy, oh, okay then. There's also a little bit of a hope that they might do the same so that there's no interruptions on their side. Experience tells, I think, most of us that happens less often than we'd like, and yet it does happen sometimes, right? People are kind of, again, you're modeling behavior, and so are people following that model? Moving forward, I want you to know that today's meeting is all about you. My job today is to keep us focused to find out what kind of home will suit your lifestyle, your needs, your wants, and your budget. We'll talk about the home buying process a little. We'll answer all of your questions, and then we'll discuss our expectations and roles in this relationship. I'm curious, how does that sound so far? And of course, they say, it sounds wonderful. Great. So there are really only 3 possible outcomes to today's meeting. 1, you'll understand all the benefits that I can provide to you in your home search, and you will hire me as your buyer's agent. And frankly, I think that would be awesome. Number 2 is, after hearing what I can offer, you may decide that what I bring to the table is just not a good fit for you and your family, and you may choose not to hire me. And frankly, that'd be less awesome. Or 3, it is possible that I may determine that I cannot meet or exceed the expectations that you've set, and will choose to turn you down now rather than let you down later. Does that make sense? Excellent. So let's switch gears and talk about the home that you're looking for. Okay, we're going to stop right there. Talk to me about what you just heard. Talk to me about that setting the stage. Remember, this is a simple 3 to 4 minute max experience. This is not like a 45-minute conversation here. This is fast and furious to kind of set the pace, set the stage and the pace of what's about to happen. Talk to me about your ahas. What did you hear? What do you have questions around? Go ahead, Patricia.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like the way that you set that up with the 3 opportunities, because not only can you, kind of advise them how it's going to go and what's going to happen and what they can expect, but also, from a qualification standpoint, rule out, a client that may just not be a good fit for whatever reason, and not have to expend a lot of time and energy on it, and or have to get yourself out of it later on down the road.
Yeah, well said. Well said, right? And really what Patricia's underlining here is that 5th paragraph, like the 3 possible outcomes paragraph, it offers them options. It offers us all options. Like this we're not here to be forced together. We have choices to make. You have a choice to make, and I have a choice to make. And the setup is, look, we could be in love and get married, and that would be awesome. Or we could maybe love each other less and decide that after the first date, you know what, there were no sparks, and we'll just go our separate ways. Or, I may decide that, you know what, even though you love me, I just don't think I can give you the brilliant life that you want. And so we'll part ways anyway, right? Just to use marriage as an analogy, right? But it's all positive. There's nothing negative about either of the any of the outcomes, right? And when they understand they have some options here, you're either going to hire me or you're not. That lets them relax. There's less pressure then. They know that they have a choice. They also understand that as much as they're interviewing me, I'm interviewing them, and we're going to make a together decision at the end. What else? What else did you hear? What else do you love? What other ahas?
It's about them.
Yeah, 100%. It starts with them, the middle part's about them, and it ends with them, right? Remember I said earlier today that I spent a lot of time in my life attempting to figure out how to say things to project kind of how I wanted people to feel or what I wanted people to know. And now I don't do that anymore. I just tell them. This is a version of that, right? Because if you want people to understand that today's session is all about you, why don't you just start there and tell them that, right? This is all about you. I'm turning my phone off. I've got complete and utter focus and attention on you. And I'm just going to tell them this is like all about you. It's not just all about you. It's here are the specifics about what it's about and how that's about you. Your wants, your needs, your desires, your budget, your everything. Yeah, I love that, Moses. What else? There's one really important piece I want you to be certain that you understand with this setting the stage. I'll give you a hint. It's a little word. It starts with H. And it ends with ire. Right?
You want to get hired.
Yeah, and so the idea of setting the stage here, right at this very moment, is that you're being clear with the buyer that this is a hiring conversation. The whole point of us meeting together in person or us meeting together on Zoom, right, depending on how you're setting that up, is to determine your level of want and need so that I can understand at a really deep level exactly what it is you're looking for and why. And that you can then decide whether or not I'm the right fit for you and vice versa to accomplish that. You're setting the expectation that before we finish, there's going to be a conversation about being hired or not. Can you see that when you don't do that up front, and then all of a sudden you whip out this document and start saying things like, well, it's the law in Connecticut for us to have a written agreement of compensation. And so here, you have to sign this before I can do anything. Do you understand why that feels like an ambush and people push back against that? If you didn't tell them up front, I'm so excited, this is all about you. And ultimately, in about 20 or 30 minutes, we're going to have a conversation about you hiring me. That's pretty much what you just outlined for them. Yes, Donna Gilbert.
I've got barking dogs also. And just to underscore that, this is your first opportunity to really set expectations and show them that you're going to give them direction and they are to follow it. This is what we're here for. This is what we're going to talk about. And at the end of this is what you will do. And we'll do it together. Yeah. And you're starting to model that behavior that's going to continue through the entire transaction.
Yeah. And it's so important what Donna just said, so important what Donna just said, because one of the main reasons we get hired is to be directive. And some of you hear directive as pushy or aggressive and negative. Directive is without being directive, what are you there for? If you're not directing them through the process, they don't need you. Right? So being directive is one of the key things that you have to recognize that people are hiring you for. I know we are out of time. I'm going to take Marlene and John because they raised their hands. And if you have to go, I understand. I will see you tomorrow. Remember, we start at 4:30. If you can hang out a couple of minutes more, we'll answer these questions and we'll be done. Marlene.
Okay, so what if the buyer, has called you or contacted you and they want to set up a showing? They picked a house off of Zillow or Realtor.com or whatever.
Mhm.
And do you schedule that appointment before you have this buyer consultation or not?
So I'll give you my answer to that. My answer to that is, how could we know whether the property that they've picked off of Zillow is actually a property that makes sense for them if we haven't gone through the consultation? How are we going to know that we're going to be hired? How are they going to know that I choose to work? My policy is that I work with people who are pledging, I'm pledging my loyalty to you. I'm going to ask for that same thing back, and we're going to have a mutual expectation setting conversation, and you're going to hire me. How is that supposed to happen if I'm just, what you're describing is what I call Pop-Tart real estate, right? Somebody calls and says, hey, I saw this house, can you show it to me? And we, like a Pop-Tart, bing, we pop out of the toaster and we run off to show a property. There's no fiduciary responsibility that's been outlined. They can start saying things to me that I don't have them as signed clients, so therefore there's no confidentiality inferred there. And just don't forget this: if you go out and show a property that's not listed by your own brokerage without having had a consult and having been hired, so meaning you don't have a signed written agreement of compensation, you're breaking the law.
Okay, so what is the script that you say to the person on the phone who wants to go out and take a look at some properties? You're not we're not the only agent. There's other companies, there's other agents. How do you talk them out of setting up an appointment and going through this buyer consultation first?
Yeah, so I would absolutely set the appointment. That's, to me, that's like step number one. When someone calls in out of the blue, we're going to start having a conversation, right? And so Marlene calls me out of the blue and says, hey, I found this house. I don't know if you're the listing agent or not, but I'd like to see it. Awesome. I'm so glad you called today. Can you tell me a little bit about you? Tell me a little bit about the property. Let me get some information on that. So when did you think you wanted to see that house, Marlene? And Marlene says, well, you know what, it's Thursday and with work commitments, I would love to see that on Saturday morning. That's excellent. While I'm figuring out whether or not the sellers can accommodate us on Saturday morning, what I'd like to do is set up about a 20 or 30-minute consultation with you and any other decision makers for tomorrow night, or if it's earlier in the morning, for tonight, right? So let's just say it's now. For tomorrow night, prior to us actually meeting on Saturday, to make sure that A, this is a property that makes sense for you, but even more importantly, so that I can understand exactly what it is you're searching for, and so that I can help you make the best decisions possible as we head into this home search together. I can't wait to really kind of do a deep dive and understand how I can help you at the highest level. Does tomorrow at 5 work, or 7? We can actually do that on Zoom so that you wouldn't have to come into the office, and we can still meet on Saturday morning. Or something like that. I mean, that wasn't brilliant, but it would get the job done, right? So I would absolutely still make the appointment, and then just make sure I had the consult prior to that, because then once I had the consult, we would determine whether or not we were keeping the appointment for that particular house on Saturday. Right? I am certainly not naive enough to think that we're the only game out there. However, I am confident enough to know that I'm going to follow the process that I have set in the policy for my business, because when I do, I can serve the clients at the highest level possible. Instead of going and meeting somebody at a house, signing a piece of paper on the trunk of a car, and hoping for the best, right? That doesn't work for anybody. It's not effective or efficient real estate. Does that answer that?
Yeah, it does.
Does anybody have a different answer than the one I gave? Another thought?
I'd say maybe say something along the lines of something I do for all my clients that I work with is I do a consultation for them to really find out their needs and their pain points or something like that, so I can best serve them to the highest ability or whatever, yada, yada, yada.
Brilliant. Love it. Right. The other path that you could pedal down is, that sounds great. I am so excited to be able to show you any property that makes sense in your search. In our industry, as you may know, we do follow a process. Step number one will be for us to have a quick Zoom meeting, 20 or 30 minutes longer if you have some questions, which I can accommodate. If you're looking to see property on Saturday, I can accommodate for you later this evening or tomorrow, which works best for you, right? You can literally outline, great. So step one, in order for us to see that property, is we have this consult. Right, and so here, we'll play devil's advocate. The person on the other end of the phone says, well, what are you talking about? The last couple of times I called a real estate agent and said I wanted to see a house, they just met me over at the house. Here's my script for that, and I'm not kidding. My script starts with, oh my God, you're kidding. They just kind of dropped what they were doing and met you at the house? Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. Like, on behalf of my industry, I am so sorry that has happened to you. I am so glad you called today. I think what you'll find is that you may be, part of the reason that you maybe keep calling different companies to go and see different houses is that you haven't found someone who actually has a process that's all about you. May I take a moment to describe the process that I use in my business, which really focuses entirely on you and meeting and exceeding your needs. Step one of that process will be for us to meet, and we go on from there. But I'm not kidding when I say that my script for that was always and will always be like horror. Because I'm going to tell you what, you want to send a message to the person on the other end of the phone, use that script. They will listen to what you have to say. If you practice, just don't hyperventilate if you do it a lot, right? Make sure your breathing is good. John Mendez, bring us home, because I know we're going to be here till tomorrow at this point. Go ahead, John. Last question.
It wasn't really a question, but it's a kind of like a realization I came to with my business or whatever. So I know we always talk about buyer and seller consults, but one thing I'm going to start doing moving forward is like little rental consults, because like there's a saying, like, how you show up in one area in your business is how you show up in every area of your business. And a lot of most of my leads so far that I have been working with or have been rentals. And I practiced my pre-qual script, obviously, so I got pretty good at pre-qualing over the phone and seeing who I was working with. But I wasn't treating it as I would a buyer, which in that sense I wasn't giving them my best. And the representation agreement for a tenant is I still have fiduciary responsibility. And how could I be a fiduciary if I'm treating like a tenant and not like a client or not someone like I'm working with? I'm treating them differently because they are someone who's renting. And I didn't even realize that until I was in the office and I got into conversation with one of the agents in the office. And so I haven't done it yet because I haven't had anyone to do it to yet. But like moving forward, that's how I plan on proceeding. And one, I feel like it would make me more efficient, more effective. And two, it's like a lot of rental leads. It's like it's a lot easier for them to disappear on you. So it's like having that rental consult will not only like help me help them better, but help me realize who I can actually help and who is just kind of like wishy-washy, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, well, it's a great aha. And be clear that when you start doing that, you'll get better results from those people who seem a little loosey-goosey, right? Because no one else has treated them that way yet. And so when you take the time to really understand their needs, guess what? They're stickier to you now. they're not going off with every Tom, Dick, and Harry that they see on Craigslist. Right? So again, how you show up will absolutely contribute to your results. Donna Gilby, you look like you're about to explode. Tell us.
Because I'm going, also, I'm having that reaction because you do have to do the whole representation thing, whether they're buyers or they're renters. Don't misunderstand that.
Yeah.
Your obligation is the same. And here's the other thing that the state wants you to understand, that you treat everyone at every price point, buy, sell, invest, renting, exactly the same. It's the same process. You can get into, a person could get into some real deep hot water if renters who tend to be at a different price point are being treated differently than people who are spending a lot of money. Don't lose that. When we get into talking about fair housing, or you're doing your continuing, don't forget that part. So the service that you're giving to somebody who's buying a house or what, it has to be the same. The representation conversation is the same.
It's why working from a foundation and a script is so helpful, right? Because that equalizes everything. It's the same because it is the script. You work from a script, right? You're human off of a script, and yet the process is the same from start to finish. You just replace different words depending on who you might be talking to, buyer, tenant, investor, or whatever. All right, guys, thank you so much. What great questions. What a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful to you. I'm excited that we've started on the buyer consult scripts. We are going to finish them tomorrow. So 4:30 in this Zoom room, 4:30 start. You'll have Karen for the first 20 or so minutes. I will be on as quickly as I possibly can. No later than about 5 till 5. So we will work for that minimally that last hour together, finish up the buyer consult, and then kickstart into sellers on Tuesday. I'm excited. Thanks for being here. Have a great night.
Appreciate it, Rick. Thank you, man.
See you tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.